The proclamation of the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus began to address the chief priests and elders of the people once more using parables. The reign of God may be likened to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the wedding, but they refused to come. A second time, he sent other servants, saying, "Tell those who were invited, 'See, I have my dinner prepared. My bullocks and corn-fed cattle are killed. Everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went their way, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, insulted them, and killed them. At this, the king grew furious and sent his army to destroy those murderers and burn their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The banquet is ready, but those who were invited were unfit to come. That is why you must go out into the byroads and invite to the wedding anyone you come upon.' The servants then went out into the byroads and rounded up everyone they met, bad as well as good. This filled the wedding hall with banqueters. When the king came in to meet the guests, however, he caught sight of a man not properly dressed for a wedding feast. 'My friend,' he said, 'how is it you came in here not properly dressed?' The man had nothing to say. The king then said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him out into the night to wail and grind his teeth. The invited are many, the elect are few.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Our Gospel passage for this Sunday is taken from St. Matthew. We have been reflecting on the generosity of God in calling us to be part of His life, of His kingdom. In the first reading from the prophet Isaiah, there is a vision of the messianic banquet, the age of salvation, and it is depicted in terms of a glorious banquet with the choicest food and the choicest wine. But it is just an image of the offer of salvation, triumph over death and sin, the triumph of God's joy offered to all, not just to Israel, but to all the nations. What an offer given to sinners, given to people who do not always deserve such a banquet. But that is the generosity of God. Everyone is called. The question is, will people come? In the second reading, St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, describes his own experience. He was called in his weakness, in his sin, even in his crime. God was generous to him. He was called to be an apostle. And through the ups and downs of his mission and life, St. Paul never missed out on the generosity of God. He's claimed that God has always provided him strength, the strength that he needed in his mission. And St. Paul also experienced the generosity of the Philippians through their compassion, through their help extended to him. And he prayed that these Philippians would also experience the generosity of God. Generosity upon generosity. God generous to St. Paul. St. Paul generous to God and to other people, like the Philippians. The Philippians generous to St. Paul. Oh, what a never-ending banquet we hope that will happen. In the Gospel, Jesus speaks again to the religious leaders of the time using parables. And in this parable, he depicts God as a king and someone who invites people to his son's wedding banquet. This parable is not just about the generosity of God. We should add, it is about God's generosity in Jesus Christ, the Son, who is to be married to humanity. The wedding banquet is an image of the dawning of the kingdom, depicted as the sealing of a new covenant in Jesus Christ, the marriage between heaven and earth, forged in Jesus Christ, the Son of God and the Son of Man. In Him, God initiates a new age in the world, and it is depicted in terms of a banquet. Look at the generosity of God. God invites people to the banquet. He invites. He never coerces. That's how respectful this generous God is. No one is forced, but everyone is remembered. Everyone is the recipient of an offer. And everything has been prepared. The cattle, corn-fed cattle. Wow. So this king has really made sure that the wedding banquet for his son would be superb. He sends servants to invite people. Now, in the parable, the son is of course Jesus. The servants sent by the king were the prophets, the kings, the judges of old. Those who were sent to the people Israel to invite them to reform, to return to God, to listen to the prophets again, to rediscover the good news of salvation. God has sent servants to the people with the invitation to the wedding banquet. Look at how generous and persistent in generosity our God is. Reading the parable, if I were the king, after the first invitation and nobody responds, I will say, okay, that's enough. But this king is really generous. He would go and send people over and over again. But let us look at the response. As I said, the generous king does not coerce, but simply invites. There is a need for those who had been invited to respond freely. The response of those who had been invited is quite surprising. Some, were indifferent. They just ignored the invitation of the king. If you, my dear brothers and sisters, get an invitation from the king or queen or from the prime minister or the president, would you not leave everything and say, wow, this is once in a lifetime. Let me go to the palace. But some of them ignored the invitation. Some went back to their daily affairs. They had nothing to do with the banquet prepared by the king. Their concerns were more important for them. In other words, the worldly affairs are more important than salvation, than the promise of eternal life. And worse, they insulted and they killed some of the servants, the way the prophets had been tortured, silenced, killed. This is the mystery of iniquity. Why can we turn down such a beautiful invitation? But God persists. He sends the servants to go and invite those in the byroads. In other words, if the chosen people refuses, then all the others, what we call the Gentiles, would now be welcome. The prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled. My dear brothers and sisters, the parable is very simple, but look at the disproportion, the goodness, the generosity of God, inviting us to be part of His life. Yet, this thing, the best thing that could ever happen to us, could be rejected by people who are invited. But let us remember, we face the consequences of our decision. According to the parable, those who rejected the offer have just brought upon themselves utter destruction. We are free to decide, yet we should also be free, accountable. We should be responsible for the consequences of our rejection of God's offer. My dear brothers and sisters, I am inviting you to reflect on the times God had invited us in God's mysterious ways, even when we were not worthy. You know, tomorrow is October the 13th, the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. 3 years ago, on the Feast of Our Lady, it was announced that I would become the Archbishop of Manila. An invitation that came to me unexpectedly, and I could not believe it. And who am I? I'm one of those in the byways that suddenly got the invitation. I have to admit, a part of me wanted to run away, to ignore it, and just say, oh, there are other people whom you better invite, not me. But that can come. And when it comes, you know, you may be afraid like St. Paul. You may want to run away. But look beyond the invitation. Who is inviting? It is God. The God who is generous. The God who will strengthen you. And with your eyes closed and bearing only faith in your heart, you say yes. And like St. Paul, you just rely on the strength that comes from Him. Discover your own invitations. The word has been exposed. Let us now fulfill it.